Our story begins with one of the bad endings from that game where the girl is no simple villainess. In a world that fell into despair, she wanted to destroy it all. The world's mid-level boss, the Witch of Calamity, Joan Hanoul. In the scenario where they fail to kill her, every being in the world will cease to exist, leading to the bad ending. On a sunny, ordinary spring day, a new semester was beginning in a 5th grade elementary class. The teacher announced the arrival of a new student. That mundane, everyday life crumbled all too soon. Our protagonist noticed that their new classmate had an insanely faint blue color, a round rabbit tail, and long rabbit ears held high on her head. The kid then introduced herself as Joan Hanoul. That day, after observing his new classmate and hearing her share her hobbies, reading, listening to music, and dramas, he remembered his past life. However, there was no reason for him to dwell on nostalgia, since standing in front of him was someone with a more mature voice than before. When she expressed her hope for them to get along, he remembered the witch stating that such a rotten world is better off disappearing. This made him certain that the Witch of Calamity who brought the world to an end was in front of him, the mid-level boss, Joan Hanoul. He was so certain that he couldn't deny it even if he wanted to and thought that they were doomed. Brave Hearts is a game that our protagonist used to enjoy in his past life. It was about a boy dreaming of becoming the best hunter, the fighting spirit's apprentice, Kang Hanbyul. This school action RPG game, set 200 years after a cataclysm, features monsters and hunters in a world where science and magic coexist. To become a hunter, our protagonist enrolls in Joongang Academy, located in Education Town, and encounters multiple scenarios. Until that point, it resembled a stereotypical youth school life plot. But the story wasn't all that bright because the game had as many as 44 endings, most of which were world collapse scenarios. Braveheart had one more significant problem. It featured a soft-hearted and cowardly swordsman character who could never fully demonstrate his abilities. Completely useless and annoying, he would flee during battles. An innocent boy who doesn't know how to hate, and even when bullied, he remained a frustrating crybaby who never thought to defend himself, the bane of the protagonist's party. That character is our protagonist, the rabbit of the divine sword arts, Kunwu. Our protagonist wonders why he has to be such a problematic character if he was reincarnated. As if that weren't enough, he ended up in the same class as that dangerous character. He cries under his desk, thinking that no matter how hard he tries, it is beyond his abilities. Suddenly, their teacher called him, which shocked him. Tearingly, he looks at Joan Hanoul, who was standing shyly. He knows that Hanoul, who became the Witch of Calamity in the game, was a character who seemed to bear the suffering of the whole world. Abandoned by her parents at birth, ridiculed and regarded as an eyesore, she received not an ounce of affection from others, leading to a lonely and weary life. All of it happened due to a mana disaster, and being born with mutated DNA, she was an Ain. He remembered hearing that an Ain's appearance and DNA do not match their parents, but he was convinced that abandoning Hanoul was too cruel, helping him understand why Hanoul became the Witch of Calamity. However, he knows he can't sit by and let the world's downfall happen. He thinks the easiest solution would be to eliminate Hanoul before she becomes a calamity, but he doesn't want to resort to that, making him wonder if there is any other way. He then gets an idea. His teacher then tells him to choose a classmate he wants to sit next to, and do so if they agree. This directive makes him think that he must change Hanoul's way of thinking. As he walks towards her, he remembers that Hanoul's unfortunate circumstances and environment led her to resent the world. However, if it was now, a time when the game's story hasn't begun, his actions could potentially change the future. He knows that among the villains of the game, Joan Hanoul possesses the ability to destroy the world. He greets her, and she looks at him confusedly while he is busy thinking that he will help Hanoul not to be pessimistic about the world. He then asks her if he can sit next to her, thinking that if it progresses and he brings her to his side, he can reinforce his strength. She is confused and stutteringly asks if he is talking to her. He knows there are 5 years left until the start of the game's story, so before enrolling in the academy, he has decided to become friends with Joan Hanoul. By guiding her to the right path, he hopes to turn her from a calamity into a blessing. He grabs the chair next to her and sits down, smilingly telling her that she will be his partner from today onwards, and that she should take care of him. He then introduces himself to her as Kunwu, and that's how Kunwu became the childhood friend of the mid-level boss. When their classes ended, he stared at her as she picked up her bag, wondering how he could get closer to her. She asked him if he could stop looking at her, to which he apologized, embarrassed, wondering if he had stared at her for too long. As she walked away, he once again stared at her, thinking he should stop overthinking and just directly ask her to come to his house. However, he then noticed her small tail, and when she stutteringly called him, he jumped a little in shock and asked what it was. She walked closer to him and he asked what was wrong, but instead, she questioned why he was sitting next to her. He replied that it was because he wanted to be friends with her. She was stunned upon hearing his answer and shyly asked why he wanted to be friends with her. He responded that he just wanted to be friends, asking what else it could be, noticing that her ears popped up. She stutteringly expressed confusion about why he wanted to be friends with someone like her, especially since he was from a famous swordsmanship family. He silently stared at Hanoul, who seemed sad. Then, remembering something, he happily shouted Mongshil to her, telling her that she was as cute as a rabbit he once had and that he really liked rabbits. She resembled one of them. She shook upon hearing this and, with a flushed face, shouted that she was not a rabbit. She then ran to the door, making him wonder if his comment had upset her, but he immediately apologized. Before she exited the door, she stopped and stutteringly told him that she would see him tomorrow. She then ran away, leaving him relieved that she wasn't angry with him. A moment later, as he walked down the street, he couldn't believe that he had entered the world of the game. He wondered why he couldn't see his status window if the world was still a game. He then checked behind him and shouted, "Status window." Suddenly, the system popped up in front of him, and he decided to take a closer look. He was then surprised to see that Kunwu's abilities were quite impressive for his young age, with physical strength at 37, muscle strength at 34, endurance at 32, agility at 43, mana at 30, and luck at 25. Convinced that his abilities were actually quite good, he wondered why Kunwu was constantly bullied with such capabilities, but he acknowledged that it was a fresh start, far superior to his previous life. A moment later, he arrived at his mansion and upon entering, shouted, "I'm home." The lady of the house greeted him along with the maid and asked how school was and if everything was okay. He was stunned to see the lady, but rushed to hug her. She asked worriedly what was wrong. He knew that he was not living his past life, nor should he think he was living in a game, so he decided he should fully embrace his life as Kunwu. He then told the lady it was nothing and that he just felt grateful to have her. She advised him that if something happened, he should tell her, and instructed him to wash up and that she would prepare a snack before he headed to the sword training academy. He replied okay and ran to his room, walking upstairs knowing that he needed to embrace his role as Kunwu. What he needed most right now was to master the Beast King style, a sword technique that represented a prestigious swordsmanship family like his. Like a lion reigning over all the beasts, this technique was focused at the tip of the sword and was also the technique that made Kunwu the greatest swordsman. He then called for Mongshil, his male rabbit. Getting closer, he took the rabbit out of its cage, noticing that Mongshil resembled Hanoul. He thought to himself that he should completely master the Beast King style. A moment later, in the training room, he noticed there were few people around and realized he was early. He knew that these sword training academies operated in several cities, and people outside the family learned conventional swordsmanship, not the Beast King style, which was why so many attended the training academy. He wondered why everyone stopped what they were doing and looked in the same direction. There, he saw Du Xian, the Du family's sword deity, known as Lightning Flower, 2 years his senior and the most promising prodigy among all the current Du family children. In the game, Xian is a student at Jumgang Academy who becomes the strongest swordsman after graduation, and a strong ally of Kunwu. He pondered why Xian was there, but realized that, being a sword training academy of the Du family, it wasn't unusual for her to be present. He hung up his shirt, knowing they would soon see each other often, and decided to focus on practicing the Beast King style. He grabbed the training sword and began. Positioning himself, he swung his sword and executed the Beast King style's first form, counting each repetition until he reached 10. He paused, wondering if Xian would be impressed by his practice, enjoying the sweat and fun of the exercise, when he suddenly heard someone asking, "Who is that?" One kid derisively inquired what was wrong with him, while another teasingly asked if a rabbit was now practicing too. He then saw Wu Jumdong, who was eating, questioning if it was really the rabbit, Wu Yundong asking why he was there so early, and Wu Dongdong questioning whether he could use his skills in a real fight and betting that he couldn't catch even one rabbit. He knew these 3 identical triplets were the extra characters called the Cerberus in the game, and they were the kids who bullied him, spurred on by his cousin Du Sungwoo's influence. Frustrated by their presence, he realized it was the first time he couldn't focus due to their teasing. One of the triplets pressed him on why he wasn't responding. He understood that their taunts weren't the only reason he couldn't concentrate. He was also angry at himself for allowing the bullying. He remembered everything that happened to Kunwu in his past life and questioned why he had never fought back against their harassment. The triplets had once hurt him, telling him that the head of the Du family must be ashamed of him, that he was a disgrace to the family, and that they felt sorry for his parents. This memory reminded him that he hated hurting people. Dongdong mockingly asked what the point of swinging his sword was. He also suggested they should become his sparring partners, with Yundong teasingly offering their help. Knowing the human body is not weak at all, Kunwu told them they should spar lightly as if it were a real game. A moment later, the other kids were in shock when he executed his Beast King style technique, the charging stance, and struck Jumdong in the stomach. Jumdong was thrown back, and Dongdong, worried, called out to him, noting that his nose was bleeding. Yundong stutteringly asked what was wrong with him. Dizzy, Jumdong told his brothers that he couldn't see well. Angrily, he questioned Jumdong if he expected to be the end. He then urged them to quickly pick up his swords and stand up. Dongdong, who was checking on his brother, remarked that Kunwu was quite weird, while Yunong was horrified, telling his brothers that Kunwu had changed. He reassured them not to exaggerate and to stand up because people don't die from that much. Kunwu then reminded them that he, who had been hit by them in the past, could assert this. Yundong shouted, asking why he was doing this to them and if he was crazy. Yundong then reminded him that they had powerful backing and questioned if he thought he'd let this slide. Kunwu coolly asked if they were referring to his cousin, Du Seungwoo, and if they thought Seungwoo would protect them. The triplets were shocked when they heard this and remembered a time on the street when they shouted about becoming hunters, and Seungwoo told them that the fees for hunter education were too high and realistically speaking, it was unreasonable. Jumdong mentioned that they heard talents are sponsored, and Dongdong excitedly asked if that meant the fees would be free. Seungwoo had asked them if they wanted to get sponsored, to which they all agreed. Seungwoo then told them that he would handle it and that it was nothing difficult. However, he noted that they were in the same school as Kunwu, which meant they would see Kunwu often. Kunwu then told the triplets that he had just been letting himself get bullied before, and it also seemed they had forgotten that he was part of the Du family too, which meant it was easy for him to remove them from his family's sponsoring list if he chose to. He then asked them if they really thought that Seungwoo was the only one who could do it. The triplets were horrified, wondering how things had turned out this way. Suddenly, their teacher called them punks and demanded to know what they were doing and how many times he needed to tell them not to spar without permission. The teacher then told him that even if he was not a model member of the Du family, he shouldn't be fighting, but Kunwu simply pointed to the triplets and replied that they started it first. This left the teacher confused, but Kunwu asked if he was expected to just stay still and endure their bullying when he was a Du just as much as they were. The teacher then asked the triplets if they really had been picking on Kunwu. Initially stunned, they glanced away to think, and then all admitted that they had started it. Confirming that Kunwu was right, they had cursed at him, and Kunwu was not at fault. This left the teacher looking at them confusedly, while Kunwu, feeling refreshed from the admission, thought to himself that he should have stood up for himself earlier. The next day, he arrived at school and walked into the classroom, wondering if he had arrived too early. He then looked to his side and saw Hanoul alone, deeply engrossed in her book. He stared at her for a moment and greeted her. She shyly covered her face with the book and greeted him back. He then sat next to her, determined to try his best to befriend Hanoul that day. He commented that she was early every day and always reading books, then asked if she really liked reading that much. She replied yes, and asked him if he liked reading too. He responded that he was not really into books, but more into web novels, which confused her. When she asked why he joined the book club, he replied that it was because she had signed up. She said she understood, but then shyly asked him to repeat what he said. He playfully asked if she read web novels too. She stutteringly admitted yes, but explained that she didn't have much pocket money, so she could only read the free ones. Remembering that she lived in an orphanage, he decided to change the topic to avoid offending her, and asked what drama she liked. She replied that she enjoyed the drama Luxury House, and asked him how he knew she liked dramas. He reminded her that she had mentioned it during her introduction. Surprised that he remembered, she wondered why he was talking to her and if it was because he didn't have any friends either. She suspected that Kunwu was only fascinated because she was an Ain and feared that he too would eventually lose interest. Seeing her become downcast at the thought, he noticed her ears and wondered if she would mind if he asked to touch them. He then realized she really resembled Mongshul and got an idea. He asked her if she wanted to see a video of Mongshul, and when she asked if that was his rabbit, he told her he had taken a cute video of Mongshul the day before. She expressed interest in seeing it, and he showed her the video, explaining that when rabbits are in a good mood, they jump around excitedly in what is called a binky. She was amazed to see it and commented on how cute Mongshul was. He noticed her rabbit ears stand up again, so he asked her if she wanted to come to his house to see Mongshul. She immediately replied yes, but then hesitated when she realized what she had agreed to. He then raised his little finger as a promise and suggested they play at his house after school. His face turned red as tomatoes, and she thought she should refuse because she didn't want to relive past negative experiences. But after school, she was amazed and surprised when she saw his house, remarking that it was like the one in Luxury House, the drama she watched. Kunwu's mother then came out and asked Hanoul if she was Kunwu's friend, welcoming her warmly. Kunwu greeted his mother happily, while Hanoul was in shock, remembering how her old friend's parents had told them not to play with Ains and warned her not to just befriend anyone. Kunwu's mother told Hanoul that it was the first time Kunwu had brought a friend over and expressed how happy she was, encouraging her to have fun. Kunwu then asked his mother if she could make them tteokbokki, to which his mother happily agreed. He grabbed Hanoul's hand and urged her to come in quickly, despite knowing that Kunwu's curiosity might not last. Hanoul still didn't want to let go of his hand. Inside, she was shocked to see that his house was incredibly spacious. They then ate tteokbokki together and played with mongshil, which made her very happy. Hours later, Kunwu's father came home and announced cheerfully that he was back. Kunwu's mother mentioned that he was a bit late today, and Kunwu greeted his father, who acknowledged his tardiness and asked why Yi-yoon was rolling on the floor crying earlier, upset that she wanted to see her rabbit sister too. Kunwu explained that his friend had come over today, but Yi-yoon wasn't home, which is why she was upset. Kunwu then approached his father and asked if they could spar after dinner. His father was initially surprised but then excitedly said he had been wondering when he'd get to play with him, especially now that he was in 5th grade. Kunwu expressed his desire to see how much he had improved and also to experience actual combat. His father, taken aback, asked if he really meant actual combat, to which Kunwu replied yes and added that he'd like to face some real monsters. A moment later, his father asked him why he suddenly wanted to spar and told him that he didn't need to be impatient because it was not yet his time to face the real thing. His father also inquired about his motivations. Kunwu looked at his hand, knowing that in 5 years, he would enter the Du Family Sword Academy headquarters and inevitably face crises while solving various incidents alongside the protagonist, Kang Hanbyul. For this, he needed a good grasp of actual combat. He was sure that the other kids in the Du family had already gained their combat experience, and he was far behind them, so he knew he needed to catch up now. When he didn't answer, his father looked at him and asked if it was because of the incident at the sword training academy just now. His father then seriously told him that he heard about the fight at the academy, and that the kid he fought was seriously injured. However, he reassured Kunwu that he had done nothing wrong. Shocked upon hearing this, Kunwu saw that his father seemed more interested in the truth than in scolding him, but he knew that he would never fight without reason. He then replied that he had been taught from a young age that the sword from the divine swordsmanship of the Du family was meant to protect and save people, and he had taken that lesson to heart. He believed that he wouldn't have this notion if he hadn't reflected on his past life and the lessons from it, and thinking about the future had changed his mindset. He then asked his father if he shouldn't be able to protect himself and how someone who can't protect themselves could protect others. His father asked if that was the reason he fought, to which he confidently replied yes and explained that he could protect not only himself but others as well, and for that, he needed to face real monsters. His father smiled upon hearing his answer and told him that he was not wrong and his reasoning was completely valid. His father then patted his head and told him that he had changed a lot. He asked his father if he would help him, to which his father replied that he would, but there was a condition. He asked his father what it was. His father pointed the training sword at him and told him to prove that he had developed enough skill to face a real monster. His father then said he wouldn't use mana and wouldn't move more than 5 steps, so he should feel free to pounce. He asked his father about using the Beast King style, and his father replied that he would only use the basics, to which he responded that he understood. He hesitated about the conditions set by his father but was glad that his father told him not to hesitate to use the sword if necessary. His father then teasingly told him to attack, and he decided to do exactly as his father instructed. He exhaled to calm himself and positioned his training sword. He then swung his sword at his father, who easily blocked it without moving, causing him to be thrown off balance a little, but he managed to land perfectly. He then bent his knees, jumped high, and launched another attack on his father, but his father blocked it again. His father then pushed him slightly away and told him that it wasn't going to work, but he immediately launched his sword without going down and swung at his father, who jumped away to dodge it. When he saw his father just land, he knew it was the right time, so he immediately launched an attack again, but his father blocked it. As his father began to speak, telling him that he was going to use it, he struck his father on the side without letting his father finish his words. His father looked at his side, seeing that he had managed to hit him. His father then jumped away, holding his side in pain, and called him a brat, telling him that he had allowed the hit, but that it was really hard. Exhausted, he asked his father if he could acknowledge his ability, but his father just told him that he had really grown up and didn't even hesitate to hit his own father. He laughed and asked if he passed, to which his father shouted affirmatively, of course, calling him a rude brat. The next morning, his father told his mother that they would be leaving and would probably return home before dinner. His mother worriedly asked if he was sure about sending Kunwu there, questioning if Kunwu was too young, and if it wasn't too early for him, while Yi-yoon shouted that she wanted to go too. He and his father were both stunned upon hearing his mother and sister. His father then told his mother that he thought it would be fine, to which he agreed. His mother then told him to be careful and not to overdo it, to which he replied affirmatively, telling his mother not to worry because he would be back later. They entered the car, and his father asked him if he was ready, suggesting they head to the clan academy, to which he replied affirmatively. His father then started driving. He remembered that, according to the game settings, the world had become dramatically unstable since the time of the Calamity change, heavily influencing the world. This instability began as monsters started pouring out from the distorted dimension, leading to a dungeon being transformed on the other side. In that process, when the distorted dimensions of different worlds meet, a gate is created. He knew that if this phenomenon wasn't resolved in time, the world inside the gate would explode and scatter into reality. An outbreak is a phenomenon where the world in the gate explodes and scatters out. It differs from dungeons, and if they fail to conquer it within the time limit, it will significantly impact the ending. He knew that to reach the desired ending, they also needed to pay attention to the gate erosion rate, which was necessary for character growth as well. His thoughts were interrupted when his father told him that they should grab the key first after arriving. He asked his father where the gate key was, and his father replied that it was kept in the warehouse. He knew that once they cleared a gate, they obtained a gate key with which they could clear it again, a feature created by the game developers for players who wanted to re-clear the gate. He pondered whether this setting was still in function after his reincarnation. A moment later, his father stopped the car and told him that they had arrived. They got out, and his father introduced him to his workplace, the Regulus clan. The Regulus clan was established during the catastrophe by the first head of the Du family. It now has several branches across the country. Access to the dungeon gates and monster habitats, managed by the government, normally requires a hunter's certificate. He knows that since he doesn't possess a certificate yet, he shouldn't be able to enter the gate. However, his father, who is the branch manager, is greeted warmly by the employees, making his situation within the clan unique. He thinks he doesn't need to adhere strictly to those restrictions and, with his father's help, can just go through the gate that is kept by the clan. Suddenly, he heard someone shout excitedly, and a hand grabbed him. A lady then hugged him, asking if he was their manager's son, while the other employees surrounded him, glad that he looked all innocent, a good thing he didn't take after his father. One employee began to pinch his cheeks, telling him how cute he was and that they wanted to hug him with all their might. A moment later, he was showered with kisses by the employee hunters when the lady asked his father if he intended to enter the gate with his son, leaving him wondering if all the hunters were so affectionate. The lady then tells his father that they shall access room 2 as planned, and his father tells him that they should go. However, he is confused when he sees the key and asks his father why the key he just received is white. He remembers that the gate's levels of difficulty are differentiated by 7 different key colors, starting from the easiest level, white, followed by gray, yellow, green, red, blue, and the most difficult, black. His father tells him that white will be challenging enough for him, to which he replies that he understands, but truthfully, he wants to attempt the gray level. His father then opens the gate and tells him that they should go in. He then saw another gate inside, and his father explained that it was an artificial gate, and that if he inserted the key obtained by clearing a dungeon there, the gate would open. He was amazed to see it and remembered that they could upkeep a large clan thanks to the maintenance costs, realizing how powerful his family was. His father then called him over seriously to tell him that they were going to enter the gate now and asked if he was sure he was ready. His father advised him to think it through again because once they were in there, they could not leave until they had cleared the dungeon. He silently looked at his father for a moment and confidently replied that he had given it enough thought already. His father smiled worriedly at him, but before inserting the key, he asked his father if he would intervene if he was unable to clear it. His father replied that even if he failed, he would have his back, so he shouldn't overdo it and make him get scolded by his mother. His father then inserted the key and activated the gate. The gate slowly opened, and as he entered, he saw crystals everywhere, shining brightly. He looked around in amazement. It was his first time entering a gate, and then the system popped up, showing him that he had entered the White Level's Pink Crystal Cave, and his mission was to eliminate 15 goblins ranked 0.1. As he read the system, he wondered if the conditions for clearing were simple because it was a White Level gate, and asked where the goblins might be. Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him, quickly drew his sword, and positioned himself while holding the real sword, knowing it was dangerous and he should be cautious. He then waited, staying on guard so he wouldn't be taken by surprise. He was then surprised to see his father in front with the goblins tied up. He ran to his father and asked if he had captured all the goblins. His father replied that they were all there. He counted the goblins and confirmed there were 15 in total. He calmed himself down and told his father he was ready. His father said they should begin then, and since he couldn't handle them all at once, they should start with one. His father walked towards the smallest goblin, telling him it might be the weakest of the group, but he shouldn't be careless and must stay alert. But before his father could finish his sentence, the goblin freed itself in anger, surprising his father a little. The goblin then rushed at him while he asked his father if he was referring to the fact that they are fierce, to which his father agreed and reminded him not to forget it. He knew that he possessed knowledge from games, but as a member of the Divine Swordsmanship Du family, he also held knowledge about monsters, and he thought these creatures must have understood that their only chance to survive was to fight him. The goblin then grabbed a sharp crystal, making him realize it was desperate enough to use a crystal as a weapon, and he knew he had to be cautious because a small mistake could be disastrous. He then bent down, thinking that since it was an actual fight, he should put in his everything. He then activated his Beast King style basic technique, 5th form piercing stance, and thrust his sword at the goblin's head. He pierced his sword into its head, and the goblin kneeled on the ground. The goblin then lay on the ground dead, causing his father to sigh in relief. He tightly grasped his sword and proudly declared that one was down for now. As a party member of the main character, Kang Hanbiul, Kunwu has one restriction. There is a feature called gift in the game, and among the passive skills that define the character, Kunwu's gift is evasion instinct. At first glance, it seems like a useful ability. His father then released 2 goblins, and as they faced him, he contemplated that evasion instinct is literally the ability to move one's body instinctively to avoid attacks when sensing a life-threatening crisis. While it appeared to be a useful ability for Kunwu, who wields a sword, his fearful and fragile character often leads him to disobey commands, causing the gift to be rejected. Due to this gift, players generally did not include Kunwu in their party unless it was unavoidable. The evasion instinct also caused Kunwu to defy player commands, leading to frustration. However, there is an event in the story that triggers Kunwu's awakening. Later in the narrative, Kunwu gains control over his gift after the awakening. A character who awakens late becomes a remarkably strong morale booster, and later, Kunwu demonstrates his overwhelming ability to defeat enemies by avoiding most of their attacks. He remembers that it was said raising Kunwu well could make the later part of the game easier, but he knows it is still a long way off, and if he does nothing but wait, it'll be too late. So, he couldn't just sit still and wait. The goblins growled at him in anger, and he stared back at them, knowing he needed to advance his awakening. He knew it might be impossible if it was just a game, but for him, it was reality. He then remembered that when he played the game, he didn't find any situation that triggered the awakening in the later part of the story, so he thought it must not be hard to awaken early. He then jumped closer to the goblins and swung his sword, determined to push himself to the limit. Later, many goblins lay dead on the ground, but he told his father to release the next one. His father suggested they take a rest, but he replied that if it was only to that extent, he was fine. His father sighed and said that if he insisted, they should face all of them while the last 4 goblins stared at him in anger. His father then released them all, and the goblins rushed at him. But they all jumped behind him, catching him off guard. He looked around, wondering if it was a diversion tactic, and noticed that 2 of the goblins were above him, but he couldn't locate the other 2. Suddenly, he felt something approaching from behind. He let his body react for a moment, and his gift, evasion instinct, swiftly moved him to the side. Then, something from behind tried to hit him, but he avoided it, and it struck the crystal in front instead. He was stunned in horror when he realized that his body had moved without his conscious will, indicating that his gift had activated. Knowing that the evasion instinct had sensed the crisis, he resolved to trust that instinct. He then positioned his feet, ready to deal with the goblins first. Thanks to his gift, he managed to spot where the 4 goblins were hiding and swore he wouldn't fall for their trick again. One of the goblins threw another crystal from behind, but he reassured himself it was fine since his evasion instinct was activated. He dodged the crystal, shocking the goblin who threw it. He then jumped, using the crystal to reach one of the goblins trying to hit him with arrows. He slashed the goblin in half with his Beast King style basic 2nd form attack stance, but was surprised when he looked behind and saw the goblins waiting for him at his intended landing spot with a sharp crystal. He then compressed and rotated the mana within his body, loading the mana that emerged from his heart into his sword, now wrapped by mana. He swung his sword with his Beast King style 1st form Lion Crush cut and successfully slashed the 2 goblins waiting for his landing. He then safely landed on the ground and asked if only one was left, shouting that he'd go straight for it. However, his father told him there was no need to rush and asked what if he got hurt, but he replied that it was okay because he believed he could handle it. His father warned him to be careful since it was the last one and he should be more cautious. He agreed and headed toward the last goblin. A moment later, his father silently watched him, deciding to trust in his son while observing the piles of dead goblins he had slain. He was catching his breath when his father called out to him. The system then displayed that he had cleared the gate and that an exit gate would be generated where the gate key would appear. It also warned that the gate would close in 24 hours. Then, a bright circle of light appeared above them, and within it was the key. The key then landed in his palm, and he saw that it was the same white key they had used. He clenched his teeth and cursed inwardly. His father laughingly asked what was with his face and if he didn't believe that he had cleared the gate. He just called to his father, who responded with a smile and pride. But he merely asked his father if there were any other gates. He then realized that he couldn't use that dungeon for practice until the cooldown was over. As the gate closed, the power inside it was depleted. but he knew that the gate would become active again after replenishing its mana. This made him wonder what he should do next since he hadn't awakened his gift yet. His thoughts were interrupted when his father, Sangjun, told him that he was very surprised and had thought he would stop after 4 goblins, but in the end, he managed to defeat 5 of them easily. Sangjun then shook him while proudly asking, "Whose son are you?" and told him that there was nothing left to do there, so they should clean up and go home. Sangjun headed to the exit and asked for the key, but he hesitantly called out to Sangjun and asked if there was any other gate, leaving Sangjun looking at him confused. He explained that he felt like he was about to awaken his gift and it would be a pity to go back just like that. He asked Sangjun if they shouldn't try clearing another gate if there was enough time left. Sangjun asked him if he just said he seemed to have awakened, to which he replied yes, and suggested that they should do something more challenging. He told Sangjun that he thinks they'll be okay to enter a great grade gate, and that he can now handle 2-rank monsters. Sangjun, looking serious, reminded him that his mother, Jaya, would be furious if she knew he allowed such a thing. Nonetheless, he insisted that everyone will die eventually, prompting Sangjun to question if he really was his son. Sangjun then acknowledged his desire to push himself but warned that fighting a 2-rank monster was too much for him at the moment. However, if it was a white grade gate, it would be fine. He asked Sangjun if that was really what he thought, and Sangjun paused to think before agreeing. He told him that as a swordsman, he understood what he meant, but if he became too ambiguous, he wouldn't achieve anything, which made him happy. He thanked his father, but Sangjun just reminded him that he would step in whenever he was in danger. They then headed to the white grade gate, and he realized that not all white grade gates were the same. Sangjun warned him that it was going to be tough and that he had brought support just in case, pointing to the man who greeted them. He knew that the support consisted of dungeon-specialized magic supporting hunters, who typically used healing or buffs to assist hunters. Sangjun warned him to be cautious, as monsters might rush them immediately after entering the dungeon. Sangjun then asked if he was ready to go, to which he confidently replied yes. They then entered the gate, and the system notified him that he had entered the white grade gate, Pink Crystal Cave, and his mission was to subjugate 15 monster goblins of 1 rank. He looked around and realized it was the same world where he had fought earlier. He was wondering where the monsters were when he felt something approaching and managed to dodge it just in time. Horrified, he wondered what had just happened, but then the system alerted him that numerous monsters had appeared. 4 normal goblins, 7 swordsman goblins, 3 archer goblins, and 1 mage goblin. He noticed that there were 15 goblins, but these weren't ordinary goblins. They had specific roles that drove him crazy. He knew his evasion instinct was activated, and his gift controlled his body. He also knew that if he didn't want to die, he should run away. The man told Sangjun that it might be hard for Kunwu and asked if he really left him alone. Sangjun didn't answer, knowing that Kunwu had changed recently. In the past, he was easily startled by small things, but lately, he seemed different, and Sangjun was convinced that he was stronger now, and it was not a bad change. Sangjun knew that Kunwu had grown up to be a kind-hearted kid, but he didn't fit the fierce competition in the Divine Swordsman Du family due to his kind-hearted nature. He always hesitated to hurt others, even if it put himself in danger. Sangjun thought of how his son smiled happily when he received his first sword and how he would cry happily whenever he held a sword. Sangjun then sadly looked at his hand, thinking about how many of Kunwu's peers mocked him by calling him a rabbit. Whenever he heard that, he wanted to step in but couldn't. He wondered why Kunwu had changed when he became a 5th grader. Jaya had told him that the change was because he liked someone in his class, but Sangjun suspected there must be another reason. Sangjun recalled that while he was contemplating Kunwu's situation, someone from the Sword Training Academy had contacted him. The man introduced himself as Kunwu's swordsmanship teacher. After hearing the teacher's complaints, Sangjun asked if Kunwu had been fighting with other kids under the pretext of sparring, asserting that his son wouldn't engage in such behavior without a reason. The teacher hesitated, guessing that Kunwu hadn't told his father because of how he might react, and then revealed that Kunwu had been bullied. Sangjun, knowing his son would not harm other kids without cause, scolded the teacher in anger. The teacher tried to dismiss the behavior as typical playful roughhousing that he too had often engaged in. He asked Sangjun if it wasn't natural for children of that age to get absorbed in their own strength and play around. Sangjun, furious, questioned if this meant that Kunwu had been bullied by other kids so far and if the teacher was joking about such a serious matter. Sangjun was overwhelmed with anger at the thought of someone from the Divine Swordsman Du family receiving such treatment at the Sword Training Academy. He then demanded to know if someone had instructed the teacher to keep silent about the bullying and who they were. The teacher reluctantly disclosed the identity, and Sangjun realized that Kunwu had suffered such humiliation because he didn't hold much power within their family. Sangjun figured out that it was Du Bumjun, his 3rd older brother, behind this. He called Bumjun to confront him about the bullying, but Bumjun dismissively said they were just playing. He sarcastically apologized to Sangjun and promised to tell his son Sungwoo to apologize and not to repeat his actions. Still, Bumjun added that Sangjun must have had a hard time due to his cowardly personality, provoking Sangjun to question whether Bumjun considered this an apology. Bumjun retorted, asking Sangjun what more he should do. Reflecting on the situation, Sangjun realized that while he felt powerless, he was just enduring it alone. So, when Kunwu expressed his desire to experience real combat, Sangjun felt proud of him and was glad that his son had decided not to endure the bullying any longer. After Kunwu cleared the first dungeon and retrieved the key, Sangjun noticed that he performed better than expected. Although Sangjun had worried that his son might panic and rush, he saw that Kunwu could handle the situation calmly and adeptly. Sangjun smiled, acknowledging that his child had been a prodigy since a long time ago. However, as he watched worriedly from above, he remembered that Kunwu was still only 12 years old and needed to grow calmly. Suddenly, Sangjun's concern deepened when he saw Kunwu get injured in the arm, causing Sangjun to clench his teeth at the thought that his misjudgment had put his son in danger. The man next to Sangjun asked if it wasn't the right time to intervene, noting that Kunwu seemed to have run out of energy and that the monster might catch him. However, Kunwu remained calm, facing the goblins and challenging them to come at him. Sangjun knew that stepping in would disappoint his son but acknowledged that Kunwu was quite skilled for his age and decided to simply encourage him. Sangjun then called out to a man named Hongchul, instructing him to prepare the protection shield magic, to which Hongchul responded that it might be needed at any moment. Sangjun then detailed his plan. The moment the goblin attacked Kunwu, they would charge in all at once. He would take out the mage goblin first, while Hongchul was to use the protection shield magic as Kunwu dodged the archer goblin. However, Sangjun was stunned to see Kunwu's rigid movements, indicative of fear, yet he wondered if his perception was clouded by his own apprehension. As he positioned himself, Sangjun was shocked to witness Kunwu slashing the goblins in front of him with his Beast King-style 4th form Lion Needle recursion attack. Before this, Kunwu was running away, aware of the danger because the goblins coordinated so well that there was no opening for an attack. However, he knew he couldn't keep fleeing, or he would remain the same fearful Kunwu. Positioning himself with his sword, he thought the Beast King-style first form should work, but was annoyed by Kunwu's instinctive gift of evasion. His body avoided the goblin attack involuntarily, and the persistent voice in his head kept interfering, warning him of death if he stayed. It told him that if he died there, all his efforts would have been wasted, and that fleeing was his only respite. He noticed this voice restricted his actions and made his body move against his will. When the voice urged him to flee, he tried to command his gift to stop running and to listen to him. He wondered if this was how the real Kunwu felt before his awakening, noticing his body torn between will and instinct, feeling as if it would rip into 2 pieces. As one of the sword-wielding goblins lunged at him, the voice screamed at him to dodge, but instead, he swung his sword forward, shouting back at the voice that he must not avoid it. After killing the goblin, he realized he could resist the evasion instinct and that there might be enough distance between them now, unaware of the archer goblin behind him. When the goblin released an arrow, it struck him in the shoulder, leaving him bewildered by the sudden attack. Goblins then appeared in front of him, walking closer and causing him to tremble with fear. He walked backward, not realizing the danger. Back against the crystal behind him, he knew a mistake now could be fatal. Peeking back and seeing a dead end, he shouted in fear. Tearfully, he looked at the goblin in front of him, realizing he might truly die and needed to escape, yet wondering where to run when all paths were blocked. Was this the price of defying his gift? He thought he would die at this rate, and the voice repeatedly told him he didn't want to die. Clutching his sword tightly, he lamented that if he had known it would turn out this way, he would have preferred to remain unaware of his past life. He pondered the difference between his struggles then and now. Knowing he had been blessed with a good life as a divine swordsman of the Du family and a comrade of Kang Hangul, he wondered why he had to be reborn as Du Kunwu. He then saw himself reflected in the crystal, crying like a child. This made him wonder if the person in the reflection, shoulders hunched, trembling with fear and shedding tears, was truly him. He felt anger upon seeing his reflection and realized that he absolutely must not recall his past life for no reason. If he hadn't, he'd probably be living aimlessly, with a face showing such despair. He told himself that he didn't want to live like that and had been pushing himself to the limit to overcome his weaknesses and become strong. He then clenched his teeth, wondering how he could forget his conviction and shrivel up like a coward. He resolved not to die in such a way, nor did he want to run away, so he told the voice in his head that they should overcome that fear and move on. The voice in his head urged him to run away, but he planted his foot firmly on the ground, ignoring the voice that told him not to proceed. He then released a blue thunderbolt, telling the voice that he must fight for his life. A notification then appeared, showing him that he had acquired the skill Instinct Control Level 1, which allowed him to control his instincts at will. He began to slash at the head of the goblin in front of him, causing the other goblins to look at him in confusion. He then charged towards them, slashing as he went, and noticed that unlike before, his body could move freely, feeling as if electricity was surging within him. When the archer goblin was about to shoot him again, he rushed toward it, slashing while dodging the arrow. He felt unstoppable. Sangjun, who was watching, wondered what he had just seen. He was sure Kunwu had been full of fear just a minute ago, but now Kunwu had regained his composure. Hongchul asked Sangjun what had just happened, and Sangjun replied that it was his son's doing. However, Hongchul clarified that he wasn't asking about that. He was curious how Kunwu fought so well when the protective shield they had prepared to use against the mage goblin wasn't even required. Hongchul then asked Sangjun if all members of the Du family were like Kunwu, but Sangjun could only reply that he wasn't sure either. Sangjun noticed that Kunwu could predict where the attacks would come from and even managed to avoid them, making Sangjun guess that he had managed to overcome the crisis and wondered if Kunwu had now awakened. In disbelief, Sangjun asked aloud if it was Kunwu's gift. Sangjun then thought that to reach an awakening, Kunwu must have pushed beyond his limits while being determined to change, and that his determination was truly extraordinary. However, his thoughts were interrupted when Hongchul called out to him. Sangjun turned to see Hongchul and was shocked to see Kunwu use his Beast King-style first form Lion Crush Cut to kill a goblin. Sangjun asked if the thunder emanating from Kunwu was the Blue Thunder and was stunned when he saw it. In amazement, Hongchul told Sangjun that the divine swordsmanship of the Du family was really impressive and asked if it indeed was the famous Blue Thunder. However, Sangjun didn't answer, still in disbelief at what he had witnessed, and wondered if it was even possible for a kid to master the Blue Thunder technique and how one could become that strong in such a short amount of time. Staring at Kunwu, Sangjun thought it was impossible. He then asked if Kunwu really had awakened when Hongchul noticed a system notification announcing that they had cleared the gate. Hongchul told Sangjun it was a clearance notification, and Sangjun just sighed, still unable to believe what was happening. Exhausted, Kunwu lay on the ground and said he was tired to death. Suddenly, the system popped up in front of him, showing that he had pushed his body to the limit, so his physical strength, muscle strength, and agility stats had all risen by 1. However, Kunwu thought his stats should have increased during the fight with the goblins, not now. He knew that Brave Hearts was a game where physical strength stats don't increase with leveling up, and that the only way to do it would be through training or sparring in the academy, which was a tricky part of the game. Yet, he thought it had been easy, considering that Brave Hearts aims for replayability, where existing data could be transferred to the next playthrough. He realized it was impossible now that it was not a game. Kunwu thought about what he should do next, gain tons of experience and become stronger. Sangjun then sweetly called to him and approached, asking if he was alive, unaware that one of the dead goblins was releasing something shiny from its body. He responded to Sangjun, admitting that he thought he overdid it because he couldn't move at all. Sangjun told him that it was expected after moving like that, expressing his shock at Kunwu triggering the Blue Thunder and speculating that Kunwu might be the youngest ever to do so. Surprised to hear this, Kunwu asked Sangjun if he had really performed the Blue Thunder. The Blue Thunder is a phenomenon that occurs when using the signature sword technique of divine swordsmanship, the Beast King style, where the friction between the man and the atmosphere creates a blue current. Proper posture and speed, the extent of power applied to the sword, and correct activation of the mana circuit are all necessary. It's a phenomenon that only appears when various elements are perfectly harmonized. Kunwu then remembered feeling something burst out from him and realized it was the Blue Thunder. He told Sangjun that he wasn't sure if he could do it again and couldn't really remember. Sangjun reassured him not to worry because having experienced it once, his body would remember, and with continuous training, he would be able to do it again. Sangjun then praised him for doing a great job, but Kunwu just stared at Sangjun and asked where Hongchul was. Sangjun replied that Hongchul was working. Shortly after, Hongchul arrived, happily holding something. He told Kunwu that he had really been through a lot and, thanks to him, they were able to obtain magic stones. While Hongchul was busy praising him for his Blue Thunder, he noticed shiny things on the goblin. So he grabbed one and shouted to Sangjun that there was something there. Sangjun told him that he was lucky because he had found a lost stone and explained that a lost stone contains a providence and can be used as material like a magic stone. Kunwu remembered that in the game, magic stones were used as currency or for artifacts, but lost stones could be converted into stats, making him wonder what kind of lost stone it was and if he should examine it. The system then showed him that it was the lowest grade agility lost stone, which enhances the user's ability, increases agility by 1, and is effective for users with an agility below 60. He thought it was not bad and he'd like to have it. Hongchul asked Sangjun what if the lost stone resonated with Kunwu and if they should give it to him. Sangjun told Hongchul that he was still good at navigating those social waters and thanked him. Sangjun then suggested that they should check if the lost stones resonate, so Kunwu should try infusing it with mana. He then put mana on it, knowing that it was bound to resonate with him, and Sangjun excitedly told him that it was responding, which meant it was his. Hongchul then told Sangjun that he was suddenly craving some beef, making Sangjun shake his head and sigh in silence. Monday morning arrived, and he was in the room, feeling his whole body ache. Ever since the day after the actual combat, he had suffered from terrible body aches, and Jaya angrily asked Sangjun why he ended up like this. He was lying on his desk, realizing only now that the recoil from using the evasion instinct was severe, so he decided to really try to avoid doing it again. Hanoul then arrived in their classroom and worriedly asked him why he was like this and if he was hurt. He greeted her good morning and told her he was a bit sick over the weekend and had a severe body ache. She worriedly asked him how it happened, if he had taken any medicine, and if he was okay now. He replied that he had an actual combat session over the weekend, and she asked him if he meant fighting with monsters, if it was okay for them to do so at their age, and if it wasn't dangerous. He replied that he was from the Du family, so all his cousins his age had done it, and he was the only one who hadn't yet. She told him that she had some bandages and ointment in her bag, but he told her it was okay because the wounds had healed and asked her why she carried those around. She then replied that she used to get hurt often, though not so much these days. He looked at her and thought that it must be from all the bullying she had experienced. She then got closer to him and told him she would do it. He told her that his wounds had healed and asked her why she bothered, but she just shouted at him to just listen to her and give her his arm. After putting bandages on his face, she told him it was all done, and he shockingly asked her if it was a bandage, but she just told him to stay still because it would make it heal faster. He showed her his medicine while telling her that he was really okay and it was all healed, so if she really wanted to help, she could remind him to take his medicine at lunch. She stared at him in silence for a moment and put a bandage on his arm while telling him that he should let her know if there was more she could do to help him, and since he really looked like he was in pain, she would listen to anything just for today. He tells her that if that was what she said, then he asks her if he can touch her ears, leaving her shocked and causing her to stutteringly ask what he just said. He apologizes to her and tells her it was just a joke, realizing that it might have been too much and that he seemed kind of bold. She thinks for a moment, then grabs his hand and shoutingly agrees to his request. She puts his hand on her head while warning him to just touch her ears quickly, not to linger for too long, and to tell her if it doesn't cheer him up. He stutteringly replies okay and touches her ears, amazed at how soft and fluffy they are. He then enjoys touching them without realizing that he has been doing it for too long. She then jumps away and shouts at him to stop, saying it should be enough to cheer him up. She was red as a tomato, wondering why it felt so good to have her ears touched and if it was because Kunwu was used to raising rabbits. She then realized that she almost got completely lost in the sensation while he was caressing her ear, and felt embarrassed about it, but seeing how much he enjoyed it, she guessed that she should let him do it every once in a while. She then jumped a little surprised when he looked at her, making her wonder if he had read her thoughts. He thanked her and told her that he felt energized now. He then asks her what she thinks about them becoming hunters together. She was shocked by his sudden suggestion and asked him if it doesn't cost a lot of money. He replied that he thought she had all the qualities needed to be a hunter and could tell by looking at her that she came from a noble family. She tells him that he is saying weird things again, but he tells her that he has his reasons. He then begins to explain to her that first, she is a demi-human, which means she is physically superior to others. Second, the mana she unconsciously emits feels very dense, suggesting there is a high chance she is good at handling magic. She tells him that she has never released mana, and he can't believe that a Witch of Calamity can't handle magic, so he tells her that every living thing unconsciously emits mana and he can sense it because he knows how to handle it. She asks him if he really means it, and he nods confidently. She then looks at her hand, wondering if she could really become a hunter in the future. She knows that when she turns 19, she will have to leave the orphanage. It would be great if she got adopted, but she understands that as a demi-human, it is unlikely, and becoming a hunter could lead to a successful life with high earnings. However, she also doubts whether she can fight monsters given her fragility. He sighs and tells her there's no need to worry. He promises her that she can do it and that he'll be right by her side, so she shouldn't worry because he'll take care of her. Her eyes light up when she hears this, and seeing him confidently tell her that if she became a hunter, she would be hunting with him and that he believed in her, so she should believe in herself too. She shyly wonders what Kunwu sees in her to be so confident, and while it feels weird, it truly makes her feel like she can do anything. She then stutteringly asks him if he will take responsibility. He grabs her hand, telling her that it is settled and they should attend the same middle school. and then enroll in the high school academy together. She shyly asks him if he really means that they should do it together, which he confirms and tells her that they should start by joining a sword academy to build up their strength. She panically asks him if he means she should enroll in a sword academy and reminds him that she doesn't have the money to enroll in such a place. But he simply asks her why she should pay when it is run by their family and tells her that she can attend for free. Confused, she asks him why he is being so nice to her when she doesn't have much to offer him. He replies that he is hoping to benefit from her success later on, making her ask him what he means by that. He tells her that someday, when she becomes a famous hunter, maybe he'll gain some benefits from it, and if he has to give a reason, that's it, nothing more. She stares at him in surprise for a moment and eventually smiles. She then laughingly asks him what he really means and tells him that he is really weird. But the truth is she is really grateful to him. She then asks him if it means that she'll be learning how to use a sword too, but he replies no and tells her that she needs to focus on physical training. Confused, she asks him why. He responds that she should learn magic because she seems to have a talent for it and tells her that it would be better if she had a teacher. After that, their training continued steadily. Once their school ended, they would focus on learning basic swordsmanship or strengthening their endurance at Kunwu's family dojo. On days when they didn't go to the dojo, they would train together at Kunwu's home, though he often felt like Hanoul was coming over for dinner rather than training. He thought that the purpose seemed reversed, but it was good to have some motivation. However, since he was also a beginner with magic, he realized he needed a new teacher and wondered where he could find such a person. He then remembered the Witch of Colors, Hong Yina, who in the game was mainly an instructor teaching elemental magic to academy students. He speculated that at that point, she was likely wandering across the country, known as the Witch of Five Colors. He leaned back in his chair, thinking he'd asked Sangjun to put out some feelers, but guessed he could do nothing but wait, hopeful they would meet soon enough. Suddenly, someone asked him what he was so deep in thought about, and he realized he hadn't even noticed Sangjun was there, which made him shout in surprise and tell Sangjun that he really scared him. Sangjun laughingly asked what he was thinking about so deeply that he hadn't noticed him coming in, and he replied that he was just wondering when he would get to meet the person he had asked him about a while back. Sangjun told him not to be impatient and that they had gotten in touch today, which excited him. Sangjun then informed him that they agreed to visit in a month. However, if they were not satisfied with his skills, they wouldn't teach him. He told Sangjun he was prepared for that possibility, but if he was not talented, there was nothing he could do. Yet, he was confident that wouldn't happen because, even though he was unsure about himself, there was no doubt Hong Yina would show interest in Hanoul's talent.